The knight took this potion bottle and began to examine it. However, he couldn't figure out what it was. Then he began to lick the bottle. Right looked on in shame. Right said that the knight still seemed to have doubts. Right handed over the second bottle and said that whatever bottle the knight chose, Right would drink it. The man immediately took the bottle from the hero and then gave him his own. I see, I'll drink this, Right said, opening the bottle. And so Right drank the potion and then demonstrated that the bottle was now empty. Then the knight turned around and looked at the girl who was standing behind him. Let me. Oh, the girl shouted. She opened the bottle. When she brought the potion to her wounded father, she said that she had brought medicine. She gave her father this medicine to drink. We can see that almost immediately, his wounds began to heal. As a result, only a couple of small scratches remained. His face also returned to normal. The girl was shocked that in just a second, the wound disappeared by itself. The knight was shocked and asked if it was really a high-level potion. This surprised Right a little, since he only gave them a level 2 potion. The hero realized that they didn't seem to have a potion culture. Then he held out the potion bottle again. The knight asked what it was. Right said it was another bottle of this potion. According to Right, the knight should also have a drink. The knight looked down at the terrible wound on his shoulder. But then he said that he was just a knight in the service. The knight suggested that we save this potion for those who need it more. Yes, you drink already, Right shouted. He said that he had enough potions, so he forced the knight to drink this potion. The knight said he would have to. Right asked the knight not to forget that he had not yet fully helped. Right said something had to be done about the bear's venom, or they'd both be dead. The knight asked if Right had a cure for the poison. Maybe, Right said. Right then asked how the knight was feeling, and if there was any effect from the poison. The knight began to move his fingers and arm. The knight said that his hands and feet were a little numb. He said that other than that, everything is fine. Right thought it looked like a stun gun. If nothing is done, the poison will reach the heart, and they will be finished. Right said he couldn't make the antidote here, so he's going home. He told the knight to bring his uncle there. The knight got angry and asked if Right even knew who this guy was. However, Right asked the knight to calm down, otherwise, this noble uncle will die. Right said he could carry the man himself if the knight couldn't. It still angered the knight, but he didn't say anything. We see that the heroes have already reached Right's house. They went inside, and the first thing the knight did was ask a question. The knight asked if this was a house, and in the middle of a forest. However, Right said that this is not a big deal. The hero said that he would take care of the medicine and asked the others to wait here. The knight said that since Right makes medicine, he must be a doctor. However, Right replied that this was not the case, and that he did not have a medical education, but he could make medicines. The knight asked in surprise if Right didn't have a weapon, but he could make an antidote. The hero replied that this is exactly the case. Right said that if the knight is worried that Right wants to give them more poison instead of medicine, he can monitor the process himself. The knight asked if Right would give him some time, to which Right agreed. Then the knight and the girl went into one of the rooms in the house. They put the injured man on the bed. Right brought water and a towel, but the knight immediately drank it, checking for poison. Right asked about the poison. He asked if there were any new symptoms. The knight said that his entire arm was numb and asked if Right would have time to make an antidote. The hero said that he would definitely have time. At the same time, Right was thinking that only the knight's arm was numb, which meant that this poison seemed to be acting very slowly. Right decided that there was plenty of time to make an antidote. He picked up some grass and realized that the quality was certainly not the best. The hero thought that everything can be carefully mixed. To make a potion from materials of poor quality, you need to be clever. Right thought that only one type of enchantment would be enough for good materials, but he would have to work with what he had. The girl also watched Right prepare the antidote. Done. That's right, Right said. They walked over and looked in surprise at the 2 bowls filled with the antidote. The knight said that he wanted to check if there was any poison, so he asked me to wait a bit. The knight took the bowl and then drank all of its contents. Something was happening to his arm. A poison reaction to the antidote started in his veins. In the battle between poison and antidote, the antidote won. The knight was shocked. He couldn't understand how it had happened. The girl asked Gord if everything was all right. Gord exclaimed that the numbness was gone in a second. He asked about how this is possible. Wright replied that the antidote saved the poison from working, and therefore there was nothing supernatural about it. Gord asked if it was an antidote potion. Wright said it was. The hero said that he thinks it's time to give the antidote to that guy as well. Wright said he had more poison in his system. This means that if they delay, all of Wright's efforts will be in vain. The girl immediately took the bowl and ran to her father. She gave him an antidote. It was obvious that the antidote had worked. The girl was delighted and smiled, and Gord even cried a little. Wright said the guy would wake up when his wounds were fully healed and the poison was out of his system. Wright handed the bottle to the girl and said that if she thought something was wrong with the guy, she could give it to him. The girl was very shy, but she still thanked Wright. He told her that now they could finally talk. Wright immediately asked them who they were and why they were here. Gord wasn't happy about that. They exchanged glances with this girl. The girl offered to tell Wright everything. The girl asked if Wright would mind if they told him the reason for their arrival after their father woke up. Wright said he didn't mind, but asked them to talk about what they could now. Gord stood in front of Wright, then slammed his fist into his chest and said that his name was Gord and that he was King Mrs.'s personal guard. Wright asked if they were royalty. The girl replied that it was true. She said that her name was Rumia Messiahs. Rumia said that her father is the 14th king of Messiahs, Leah's Messiahs. Wright couldn't believe it. He tried not to negotiate with those who were above him in status, but he thought that since he was dealing with the king, then everything should go fine. Wright suddenly wondered indignantly what was going on. Wright was thinking that there were only 2 members of the royal family, one of them a king, and yet there was only 1 bodyguard with them. Wright knew that was definitely suspicious. He thought there must be some special circumstances. Rumia asked him to keep this information a secret. Wright said he understood her, and then introduced himself. Wright said that the first thing to do was wait for the king to wake up. Then we can discuss the plan, Wright said. Rumia asked if Wright was offering to help them. Do you need my help? Wright asked. Rumia was suddenly flustered. She looked at Gord, who looked uncomfortable. Wright realized this and suggested that they talk later and eat first. And now the hero is already sitting by the fire near the house. He took the meat from the chest. Fresh, Wright thought as he picked up the meat. The hero realized that the food in the trunk with things does not spoil. Wright started roasting the monster frog meat on the bonfire. Rumia came up to him and asked him what it was. Wright said it was fried frog meat. I don't know what kind of frog it is, Wright said. Rumia asked if it was safe to eat the meat of an unfamiliar type of monster. Wright said that he would definitely not die from the poison because he had already prepared an antidote potion. She told him that he was very brave. Rumia sat down and said that this is probably the folk wisdom. She said that she had never encountered anything like this, but she thought it was so interesting. That wasn't what Wright had expected. He imagined a picture of her asking him what kind of beggar's food it was. Wright wouldn't have been surprised if it looked like something like that. Suddenly Gord stepped between them and shouted that he wasn't going to let Wright fool her. Gord said he was a commoner himself, but he would never eat the meat of a monster he didn't know. Gord exclaimed that Wright wasn't like them. Really, Rumia asked, startled. Gord added that he had never used the antidote as a stomach medicine either. Wright ignored this and continued to eat the frog meat. Wright tasted it and thought that, as usual, the meat was nice and there was plenty of fat. Wright was thinking yesterday that the meat only tasted good because he was hungry, but that didn't seem to be the case. Wright asked Gord if they had taken food on the trip. The hero said that he doubted that the princess should eat such a thing. Gord said that unfortunately, they didn't have any food on them. Wright asked if this meant that Gord was on a camping trip with the royal family and they didn't even have food with them. Gord said that the circumstances of their journey were very unusual. Wright thought about what Gord had said about unusual circumstances. Wright wondered if he should ask after the king woke up. Wright handed them the meat and invited them to join him. Wright said that Gord could try for poison first. Getting started on the food, Gord said, while Rumia was already looking forward to it. Gord suddenly had a fantasy. It seemed to him that a frog girl had married him. We are again transported to reality and see that Gord is delighted with meat. He said it was delicious. Gord chuckled and said that when he was in the capital, he had tasted many delicacies, but he had never eaten such delicious meat before. Gord suddenly went crazy and asked what kind of meat it was. Wright calmly replied that it was the meat of an unknown species of frog. Gord said worriedly that they should find out the name of this type of monster. He exclaimed that this meat should be tasted in the capital. Is that what he's really like? Wright asked. Rumia smiled and said that Gord really likes delicious food. Sometimes at royal receptions, he runs straight to the table without saying hello to anyone. Then Rumia turned to Gord and asked if she could try it. Gord suddenly came to himself and exclaimed that everything was fine and the meat was safe to eat. He seems to have forgotten that his goal was to test the meat for poison. So Rumia took the meat. She was thrilled. But something was stopping her. She asked if Wright had a plate. The hero immediately used transformation magic. Please, Wright said as he made the table and all the fixtures. They were both shocked. Rumia asked about where the table and plate came from. Wright asked if he had done something wrong, but Gord said it was all right. And so Rumia sat down at the table. She cut a piece of meat and tasted it. The meat was incredibly delicious. You could tell by the look on her face. Rumia also had a fantasy playing out. She was finally transported to the beach, where she was playing with a frog. It's delicious, Rumia exclaimed. Gord watched her eat and thought that this meat was really delicious. Wright asked if Gord would eat. Gord said he was just a knight in the service. Gord said that he would try to minimize the waste of food on his part. However, Wright was skeptical and reached into the trunk. He took out a few chopsticks that had meat impaled on them. Wright said Gord could eat as much as he liked, because there was still plenty of meat. Wright said that if the meat ran out, he would get more of it. Gord said he would have to. Gord was so happy that he even put his arm around Wright. It was delicious, Gord said. He also said that even at royal receptions, such delicious meat is not served. Rumia said that Wright said it was frog meat. She said that she had no idea that there were such delicious frogs. She speculated and asked if it could be a Gallic frog. Gord apologized to the lady and said that Gallic frogs are very difficult to prepare, and therefore such meat cannot be eaten in the forest. Rumia, speaking from past experience, said that they taste very similar. This was the first time Wright had ever heard of the Gaulish lashukas. Wright asked if Gord was saying that Gallic frogs were difficult to prepare. Gord replied that this was indeed the case. He remembered a story. One day, the king ordered their meat to be served. The court cooks were given about 100 frogs, but only one of them was served to the table. And what is so difficult about them? Wright asked. Gord said that there are about 10 bags of poison in their body, and if you touch at least one of them when cooking a frog, the poison will spread throughout the body and the meat becomes unfit for food. At the same time, the pouches themselves are extremely fragile. Wright then reached into the trunk and pulled out a frog, asking if it looked like the one they were talking about. They were both shocked and exclaimed that it was a golly frog. Gord shouted that it was impossible. Gord asked if Wright had been able to safely cook their meat. Wright said it was true. Gord began to pray that Wright would share his secret with him. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Guests? Gord asked. In the middle of the forest? Wright asked, pulling out a knife along the way. Gord went to the door and ordered the princess to stay where she was. Rumia said it might be a locksmith. Rumia said that he was leaving to call for help. The princess asked if it could be that he had returned. Gord said it could really be Larsel. Who's there? Gord asked, holding the sword in his hands. Suddenly someone asked Gord if he knew the voice. It's me, Larsel? Oh, the man exclaimed. Gord told Larsel to come in, because the door wasn't locked. Someone came in and greeted Gord. It turned out to be a guy who looked very young. He was glad she was here too. Larsel said it was good that Princess Rumia was fine. Yeah, pretty much, Gord said. The knight asked if Larsel had found help. Larsel said he couldn't find anyone, and when he came across the house of local residents, he found them there. Gord thanked Larsel for scouting the area. However, Larsel said that there was nothing to thank him for, since he came empty-handed. Then Larsel suddenly asked Gord why he had brought the princess to such a place. What kind of house is this anyway? Larsel asked, looking around the room. Gord pointed to the hero and said it was Wright's house. Larsel said it was the first time he had ever heard the name, so he asked if he was an ally. Gord said that he wasn't, and that Wright was an ordinary man, although he wasn't exactly ordinary. Larsel asked if Gord had decided to bring the princess to his house. Rumia said that Wright saved them. This seemed to shock Larsel. He asked in surprise. Rumia replied that Wright first killed the monster that attacked them, and then healed their wounds. Gord said the king was sleeping in the next room. Gord said that the king was poisoned, but Wright gave him an antidote. According to him, the medicine is effective, so the king will soon recover. This confused Larsel. Larsel asked them if they were saying that Wright had just happened to show up when the monster attacked them and just happened to be carrying the right antidote. Larsel wondered if Wright was just using them. Larsel stood in front of them and shouted at them to get out of here as soon as possible, because it was too dangerous. Wright couldn't understand what Larsel was saying. Princess Rumia said that the forest is full of monsters. According to her, this house is the safest place in the area. Rumia asked if this was the right way to talk to a grateful person to whom they owed their lives. She shamed Larsel. Suddenly, Wright exhaled heavily and connected two of his fingers, namely his index finger and thumb. Then Wright opened the window. Wright asked them if they thought that if he wanted to use them, he would let them stay in a house that he didn't even lock. Larsel started shouting that Wright didn't do anything just because of Gord. Larsel also shouted that if it weren't for Gorda, Wright would have captured the princess long ago. You're wrong, Wright said. The hero said that he could kill 4 people like them without batting an eye. However, he said that he did not do this only because he was not interested in it. It's true. Larsel's actions are so predictable that Wright could have killed him on the spot. Wright thought Gord would be the stronger of the two. And if Wright had decided to kill him, Wright would have done it in 10 seconds. Larsel got angry and asked if Wright was encroaching on the honor of the Knight of Gord. Wright replied that this was not true because he was only telling the truth. This angered Larsel, so he took hold of his sword. Suddenly, the princess intervened and shouted at Larsel to stop. She asked if it was really worth talking to a grateful person to whom they owed their lives. Larsel started to say something, but she told him again to stop, because it was an order. Then the princess did something strange. She gave an order to Gord. The man immediately understood and put his sword to Larsel's throat. Princess Rumia said that if Larsel refused to obey her order again, Gord would cut off his head for treason. I hear and obey, Gord replied. Larsel was shocked. Larsel profoundly apologized and begged for mercy. He bowed to her. Wright thought that knowing was scary after all. Rumia had been acting like a normal girl all along. But now, in Wright's opinion, she was being cruel to Larsel. Wright thought that Larsel might look remorseful, but Wright could see that Larsel still didn't believe him. Wright wondered if he should put it off until later. He turned to the princess and asked if he could talk to her for a second. She agreed, of course. As she approached Wright, something surprised her. Wright challenged Larsel to a duel. How about a duel without rules, like on a real battlefield? Wright asked. Larsel asked if Wright had said he could have killed 4 of Larsel's kind without batting an eye. Larsel said he would love to break Wright's illusions, and so they drew their swords. Wright knew that an open battle with a knight was not a good position for Wright. However, in whatever world Wright is, he remains an assassin. Wright decided that it was time for a dastardly and cunning battle. We are transported to events that occurred shortly before. Wright asked if the princess could come in for a second. He whispered to her that he wanted to fight Larsel. Rumia asked if Wright really wanted to challenge Larsel to a duel. Wright said he wasn't going to kill him. It will be a mock duel. Wright said he thinks he can learn a lot about him after one battle. Wright thought that killing the princess's bodyguard was more expensive in this situation. Wright decided that they would do without pain today. Larsel said that the royal family is responsible for the education of knights, and that he didn't want to give them any trouble. Wright said he would prefer to clear up any misunderstandings. Rumia said that Larsel is very strong. She said he was far from a true knight at heart, but he was certainly quite capable. Gord confirmed this, saying that the princess was right. Gord said that Larsel is one of the 3 strongest elite bodyguards of the royal family. Gord said not to underestimate Larsel. No problem, Wright said. And so they fought a duel. Larsel asked if Rai had said there would be a fight without rules. Wright said there were no restrictions on weapons and techniques. The main thing is to fight to the death, because Wright has it. By this, Wright meant the potion. However, all of a sudden, Rumia herself answered, and said that it was a potion similar to a level 1 potion. Larsel was shocked by this, and said that Ride, after all, an ordinary commoner. Gord said that he also thought so at first. Gord said that he was afraid that Wright was far from an ordinary person. According to Gord, a commoner could live a carefree life on the sale of the medicines he made them. Larsel asked if that meant Wright was a doctor. Gord said it was because Wright had given them an antidote. Gord said that according to his potions, Wright was working as a personal doctor somewhere overseas. Wright wondered if potions were so highly prized in this world. Wright was thinking that people who make potions seem to be called doctors. In the game, Wright was called the alchemist. It was almost the same thing, Wright decided. Wright was thinking that from what they said, only a small percentage of doctors could make a level 1 potion. An alchemist needs about a 10th level of skill to make first level potions. The 10th level is only a novice alchemist. Gord said it was true. Gord said that even a personal doctor wouldn't take level 1 potions out of the country. And Wright also lives deep in the mountains. Larsel and Gord agreed that it was possible that Wright had escaped from somewhere. Wright thought it was better than knowing that Wright was actually from another world. Wright suddenly asked to leave his past alone. Instead, Wright got into a fighting stance and suggested that we start with Dolly. Larsel asked about how you can trust someone who refuses to talk about their past. Wright said that Larsel was right, because that's what they needed a duel for. Larsel agreed with him. Gord said he would be the judge. He put his hand between them, then shouted for them to start. And so Larsel began to approach. However, he suddenly noticed that Wright was trying to take something out of his pocket. At first, he didn't think it could be anything dangerous. Larsel didn't know what it was, but it scared him. Launch, Wright said. Larsel was sick. He couldn't understand what it was. The only thing he realized was that he couldn't see anything. As soon as Larsel was blinded, Wright leapt at him, swinging his sword. Rumia and Gord were both worried. Larsel said that Wright's instruments were rather unusual, because Larsel couldn't see anything. However, Larsel said that if Wright thought he could win so easily, he was wrong. Wright asked if Larsel was still fighting. Wright said that Larsel really did seem to be a valiant knight. Suddenly, Larsel parried the attack and almost wounded Wright. However, Wright managed to jump back. The hero thought that skilled warriors can sense the enemy, even in complete darkness. Larsel looks to be in his mid-20s, and it looks like he's already reached that level. Wright wondered what he should do. In fact, it won't be difficult for Wright to defeat Larsel. But in this duel, winning is not the main thing. Wright's goal is to defeat him, while showing the difference in their powers. In that case, Wright has only one option left. Wright thought of Larsel's confident handling of the sword. However, it is worth destroying his confidence. Wright shouted that he would win. He used gift and amplification and charged at Larsel. He was still blinded, but he was able to deflect the blow. They exchanged a series of punches, but no one took the lead. Suddenly, at some point, they both swung their swords. "You're not bad," Larsel said. Right in turn said that Larsel is also holding up. Suddenly, Wright's hand grew stronger. He began to press harder on the opponent's sword than before. Larsel held on with all his might and was about to say that Wright couldn't win by sheer force. But suddenly Wright used transformation. "That's it," Wright said, breaking Larsel's sword at the point of impact. Larsel was shocked, of course. But Wright didn't stop. The hero leapt into the air, ready to attack Larsel. From Larsel's face, it looked like he was being attacked by a huge monster. Larsel saw that he was holding a piece of wood in his hand. Larsel was standing there without any armor. He was in fear. After all, he was attacked and couldn't do anything. Wright, meanwhile, was already very close, almost touching Larsel's neck with his sword. Larsel screamed in fear as Wright cut off his head. Gord shouted that the victory was decided. Gord and Rumia were shocked, and Larsel couldn't understand what was going on. It turned out that Wright had just touched Larsel's neck with the hilt of his sword. Larsel had a lot of questions about whether there was an illusion there, and when Wright got there in the first place. The hero realized that using the gift requires a lot of energy, so this technique is not suitable for long fights. But Wright thinks he'll get off with a mild muscle ache this time. If Wright tried this with a high-ranked opponent, Wright would be dead by now. But Larsel's status isn't that high, thankfully. Larsel asked where his sword was and what had happened there. Wright said it was a special fencing technique. According to him, this often happens when his opponents try to deflect blows. "A swordsmanship technique?" Larsel asked in shock. However, this is all a lie. Wright only used a transformation to break Larsel's sword. Wright didn't learn anything but the basics of swordsmanship. Gord said that from Wright's movements, he wouldn't have said that he had such a special technique. But Gord asked if Wright was really that strong to break that sword. Wright asked if Larsel had a special sword. Gord said it was true. However, when Wright touched it, he didn't feel anything. Gord said that this sword was the work of the famous blacksmith Lamis. Gord said that as far as he knew, this sword was specially forged for Larsel, in honor of his acceptance into the Kingsguard. Wright thought it might not be too hard to fix. Wright can restore the sword to its original shape. Wright picked up the sword. Larsel, who was watching, was surprised. "Hands off," Larsel shouted, and snatched the piece of sword from Wright's hand. Larsel grabbed the blade, so he hurt himself. Larsel shouted that he refused to accept it and ran away. "Wait," Rumia told him. She said that Larsel dueled Wright by mutual consent, so Rumia let him go without punishment. However, Rumia said that it is not permissible for a knight to behave like this after a defeat. Larsel was terrified. Rumia continued and said that Larsel not only insulted the noble man who saved their lives, but also refused to accept defeat with dignity. Rumia said that such a defeat by a royal guardsman is a stain on the reputation of the entire state. She then apologized to Mr. Wright and said that she accepted responsibility for the indecent behavior of her subordinate. Gord started shouting at her to look up and think about her situation. She turned to him and asked him what he thought they should do with Larsel. Gord said that Larsel repeatedly refused to follow her orders and then behaved inappropriately after the duel. Gord said that such actions call into question the prestige of the Royal Guard, which means that according to the code, Larsel is subject to the death penalty. Wright began to analyze the situation. He realized that Rumia had the title of princess, but in reality, she was only a 15-year-old girl. Wright wondered if she really wanted to execute the knight she'd spent so much time with. Rumia asked if there were any other options for punishment. Gord said that other organizations could do with exclusion from their ranks, but according to the code of the Royal Guard, the death penalty is the only way out. However, Rumia didn't want to do this at all. It was obvious that she was scared herself. Larsel was even more terrified. Suddenly, Wright asked them to wait. Wright asked if there was anything to be executed for. Rumia looked at Wright hopefully, and Larsel was surprised. What Wright didn't understand was that they wanted to sentence a man to death for a couple of insults. However, This is still a completely different world. The Order of the Royal Guard is directly responsible for the security of the royal family. It was to be expected that there would be strict rules, but it doesn't look like Rumia wants to execute him. Wright also wondered what would happen if the king found out after waking up that one of the knights in his guard had died because of Wright, which would hardly help any further conversations. Wright has no reason to cover for Larsel. However, Wright thinks that this time it will be beneficial for him. And so we see that Wright asked if there was anything to execute for. But Gord said that wouldn't do. Wright said he was the only victim. However, Wright does not see a big problem here. Gord said it was true, but it was about the rules of the Royal Guard. Gord raised his hand and slapped the emblem. Gord started shouting that the Royal Guard was meant to protect the royal family. He shouted that to defame the honor of the order was to defame the honor of the king. That's why the Royal Guard code is so harsh. Wright thought about how it turns out that the problem is honor. But suddenly Wright said that Rumia and Wright were the only witnesses. Wright said that if they hid the truth, no one would know. Gord said that was true, but he wanted to say something against it. But suddenly Wright interrupted him and said that he wasn't going to tell anyone what had happened. Wright asked Rumia if she would do the same. Rumia immediately started waving her head and said that she wouldn't do it. Gord started to think, but it didn't stop him. Gord said that if Wright agreed to this, they would take Larsel under Wright's responsibility. Gord asked if the hero agreed. "Will you take responsibility?" Rumia asked. Gord said, "There was an article in the Code of the Royal Guard that said that in a special case, the execution of a guilty person's sentence could be delayed if it was necessary in the service." Wright wondered if it meant that Larsel would be free for the rest of his service. Wright asked if this meant that if Larsel continued to serve, he could indefinitely delay his sentence. Gord replied that this is exactly the case, but this requires the consent of the victim and the responsible person. But they already have Wright's consent. Then Gord said that he would be the person in charge. Gord said they had met all the conditions. Then he said that he would determine his own task. Larsel was extremely happy about this and thanked Gord. The knight said that if Larsel did anything else, he would be executed without question next time. Gord said he expected Larsel to do whatever it takes to clear his honor. Gord said that if Wright changed his mind, he could tell him, because in that case, Gord would carry out the sentence. Larsel breathed a sigh of relief, but he was concerned about Wright's behavior. Larsel still didn't like Wright, and even annoyed him. Wright realized that Larsel's life seemed to be in his hands now. How did it come to this? Wright wondered. After all, the hero just wanted to show him his strength in a duel. Wright went and got a basin of water. Then he went to the room where the king was lying and gave this basin to Rumia. The princess thanked him and said that Wright had helped them a lot. However, Wright said that it is not necessary to thank him, because there are not enough hands. Rumia, meanwhile, continued to wash her father. Wright touched the bed and asked her if she thought the bed was too hard. "Too hard?" Rumia asked after touching the bed. Wright thought that he had assembled furniture for this house, but the bed, or rather the mattress, was made from what was at hand. Rumia said that she felt that the furniture in this house was of the highest quality. This, of course, flattered Wright. The hero said that he thought to look for better materials and make a new bed. Then, Wright suddenly took out a sword blade from his inventory. Wright took it from Larsel as punishment for what happened. Larsel's face was terribly sad, but he didn't dare refuse Rumia's order and gave Larsel this shard. Rumia asked him what he wanted to do. Wright said he'd make a mattress out of it. She asked if Wright knew that torture was illegal. Wright didn't say anything, and their conversation became awkward. Rumia started talking about some kind of permission from the royal family. Wright said he wouldn't torture anyone. Wright said he would make it into a regular bed. He was thinking that the princess seemed to have imagined a bed with blades sticking out of it. He thought that this was quite an unusual imagination for a young girl. Meanwhile, Wright had already applied transformation to the sword. He started making springs out of the sword. Rumia wondered in surprise what it was. The hero replied that these are springs that can be used to make a good mattress. Wright has production skills and is confident in his abilities. But Wright is still primarily an assassin. He has no experience in making beds. Wright realized that he would have to rely on his memories. Wright realized that there were not enough materials, so he decided to make up for the lack of iron sand. Less than half of the sword fragment was left, and the funny thing was that Larsel saw it. "My sword! Oh!" cried Larsel, with a tear in his eye. However, Gord shouted for him to bring the tree here. Wright, meanwhile, continued to work on the mattress. Wright selected a few components and started putting them layer by layer. He attached all of them to springs. Then, with the help of magic, he managed to sew up the mattress so that no springs protruded from it. And after a while, they are already looking at the finished result. Wright said that was better. Rumiya asked if Wright really made it out of a sword. Wright replied that it was true, and asked if she would like to try it out. Rumiya was a bit flustered. She still decided to sit on the bed. Rumiya sat down on the bed and slipped so that she ended up lying on it. The springs were quite good quality, as the shock absorption was good. Wright asked her if she liked it. Rumiya said that it was incredible, because even though she was a princess, she had never seen such a soft bed before. Wright said he could see what she liked. She was thrilled that Wright not only knew how to make medicine, but also made such a beautiful bed out of a sword. Rumiya exclaimed that Wright was so good. The hero thought that he could start mass production and earn a lot of money. The princess bit her lip as she sat on the bed, then shot a glance in Wright's direction. The hero immediately realized that something was wrong and said that he would go to redo all the beds in the house in this spirit. Rumiya asked if he was sure. Wright said there was plenty of time. Wright left the room and went about his business. Rumiya followed this up and closed the door. Then she took off her boots and ran to the bed. The princess ran away and jumped on the bed. She started jumping up and down on the bed, rolling in all directions. Rumiya had had enough of playing and was tired, so she went to rest. Then Wright came to see her. The hero looked at her, and it seems that he had questions. The princess felt extremely uncomfortable and blushed. It turned out that Wright was holding a pillow. He tossed this pillow to Rumiya. The princess caught the pillow. At first, she didn't understand what it was, but then she realized. As soon as Wright left, she started acting childish again. She was even more tired and continued to lie on the bed and enjoy herself. Suddenly, Wright opened the door and went inside. He had put a ladder against the door and was doing something. Rumiya wanted to say something, but then she was too embarrassed to say it. "What is it?" Wright asked. Rumiya said that she had one request to make. Wright asked if this was a request I didn't want to ask for. Rumiya asked if this bed could be taken back to the palace. The princess exclaimed that of course she would pay. Wright let out a sigh of relief, as if he expected her to ask for something else. Wright thought about how he could make a bunch of these beds if he had the materials. Wright said that when she could return to the castle, he could take her with him. Rumiya was very happy. "Thank you so much," she called out. Wright realized that the new bed was a big success. At the same time, Larsel was defeated. Gord yelled at him and told him that Larsel wasn't going to be idle. "We're moving to the next day." Father Rumiya screamed in the middle of the night. My father asked if he was still alive. At the same time, Wright came in. King Leas awoke. He and Wright looked at each other. The king said he remembered that the bear had given him a fatal wound. Leas asked if he had dreamed it. Rumiya said it was real. Leas only survived because of the potion. She then pointed at Wright and said that he cured Leas' wound with a level 1 precious potion. Wright introduced himself as a doctor. Leas was surprised at first, but quickly calmed down. Leas said that it turns out that Leas owes his life to Wright. But suddenly Leas's eyes grew cold, and he asked who Wright was. The hero asked if the king was offended by his manner of speech. Leas said it didn't bother him at all. Leas said that few adventurers know even the basics of etiquette. Some people are annoyed by this, but Leas prefers not to pay attention. Leas examined his body. He didn't see a single wound on the body. Then he looked around the room and saw that the house was magnificent. Leah said that when he asked this question, he was talking about Wright's personality. The hero replied that he had already said that he was a doctor. Then Leah's thought about it and asked if this house belonged to Wright. Then Leah's pointed to the ceiling. He started talking about the lamp. Leah's had said that its light was smooth and soft, and that such things were expensive and could only be seen in the royal palace. Leah's asked where the doctor got such a thing. Wright thought that Leah's was very persistent. Leah's said that besides, his wound was too serious. A level 1 potion wouldn't help. Leah's said that based on this, it turns out that the level of the potion was higher. Wright confirmed it and said it was level 2. They were shocked. Leah's anxiously asked about how Wright got the level 2 potion. The hero replied that he made it himself. Even Gord, who was standing outside the door, was shocked that it was a level 2 potion. Leah's was tense, and he didn't like it. Leah's laughed out loud and asked if Wright was serious. Leah's asked if Wright could demonstrate his skills to the king then. Wright had no problem agreeing. Wright asked about how Leah's could tell Wright how the royals ended up in such a place in exchange. Gord and Rumia suddenly became alert.